Hello, welcome to episode 62 of the Law of Success Mastermind. I am going to wrap up Accurate Thought, which is just a few pages, then go to Discontentment. This is in the Law of Success, and then wrap up with the chapter, The Brain, out of Think and Grow Rich. So that's what we're doing. Oops. To refer to this suggestion as allegorical, we'll just read this last sentence too. If there is a possibility that every thought you release during this life will step out in the form of a living being to greet you after death, then you need no further reason for guarding all your thoughts more carefully than you would guard the food that you feed your physical body. To refer to this suggestion as allegorical, for a reason that you will understand only after you shall have passed through the door of that secret passageway to knowledge that I have heretofore mentioned, to ask me how I know these things before you pass through that door would be as useless as it would be for a man who has never seen with his physical eyes to ask me what the color red looks like. I am not urging you to accept this viewpoint. I am not even arguing its soundness. I am merely fulfilling my duty and discharging my responsibility by giving you the suggestion. You must carry it out to a point at which you can accept or reject it in your own way, and of your own volition. The term accurate thought, as used in this lesson, refers to thought which is of your own creation. Thought that comes to you from others through either suggestion or direct statement is not accurate thought within the meaning and purpose of this lesson, although it may be thought that is based upon facts. I have now carried you to the apex of the pyramid of this lesson on accurate thought. I can take you no further. However, you have not gone the entire distance. You have but started. From here on, you must be your own guide. But if you have not wholly missed the great truth upon which this lesson is founded, you will have difficulty in finding your own way. Let me caution you, however, not to become discouraged if the fundamental truth of this lesson does not draw upon you at first reading. It may require weeks or even months of meditation for you to comprehend fully this truth, but it is worth working for. The principles laid down in the beginning of this lesson, you can easily understand and accept because they are of the most elementary nature. However, as you begin to follow the chain of thought along toward the close of this lesson, you perhaps found yourself being carried into waters too deep for you to fathom. Perhaps I can throw you one final ray of light on the subject of reminding you that the sound of every voice and of every note of music and of every other nature that is being released at this time you are reading these lines is floating through the ether right where you are. To hear these sounds, you need but the aid of a modern radio outfit. Without this equipment as a supplement to your own sense of hearing, you are powerless to hear these words. Had this same statement been made 20 years ago, you would have believed that one who made it to be an insane or a fool. But you now accept the statement without question because you know it is true. Thought is a much higher and more perfectly organized form of energy than is mere sound. Therefore, it is not beyond the bounds of reason to suppose that every thought now being released and every thought that has ever been released is also in the ether or somewhere else, and may be interpreted by those who have the equipment with which to do it. And what sort of equipment is necessary, you ask? That will be answered when you shall have passed through the door that leads to the secret passageway to knowledge. It cannot be answered before. The passageway can be reached only through the medium of your own thoughts. This is one reason why all the great philosophers of the past admonished man to know himself. Know thyself is and has been the cry of the ages. The life of Christ was one uninterrupted promise of hope and possibility based entirely upon the knowledge which all may discover who search within their own being. Some men die too soon from overeating. Others die from strong drinking, while still others just wither up and die because they have nothing else to do. One of the unanswerable mysteries of God's work is the fact that this great discovery is always self-discovery. The truth for which man is eternally searching is wrapped up in his own being. Therefore, it is fruitless to search far afield in the wilderness of life or in the hearts of other men to find it. To do so brings you no nearer that which you are seeking, but takes you further away from it. And it may be, who knows but you, that even now, as you finish this lesson, you are nearer the door that leads to the secret passageway to knowledge than you have ever been before. With your mastery of this lesson will come a fuller understanding of the principle referred to in the introduction as the mastermind. Surely, you now understand the reason for friendly cooperative alliance between two or more people. This alliance steps up the minds of those who participate in it and permits them to contact their thought power with infinite intelligence. With this statement, the entire introduction should have a new meaning for you. This lesson has familiarized you with the main reason why you should make use of the law of the mastermind by showing you the height to which this law may be made to carry all who understand and use it. By this time, you should understand why a few men have risen to great heights of power and fortune, while others all around them remained in poverty and want. If you do not now understand the cause of this, you will by the time you master the remaining lessons of this course. Do not become discouraged if complete understanding of these principles does not follow your reading of this lesson. This is the one lesson of the entire course which cannot be fully assimilated by the beginner through one reading. It will give up its rich treasures of knowledge only through thought, reflection, and meditation. For this reason, you are instructed to read this lesson at least 4 times at intervals of 1 week apart. You are also instructed to read again the introduction that you may more accurately and definitely understand the law of the mastermind and the relationship between this law and the subjects covered by this lesson on accurate thought. The mastermind is the principle through which you may become an accurate thinker. Is not this statement both plain and significant? Mastermind is the principle through which you may become an accurate thinker. Yeah, I believe that. I believe that for sure. Okay, now we are in discontentment. There's the picture. After the lesson visit with the author. The great success lessons that cannot be learned from reverses. I guess it's Jesus or something because it's a man carrying a cross. It says poverty, but it's not Jesus. It's a bunch of men carrying crosses. It looks like a bunch of men carrying crosses on the journey of life, with poverty on their back. And all-wise providence has arranged the affairs of mankind so that every person who comes into the age of reason must bear the cross of failure in one form or another. You see in the picture at the top of this page the heaviest and most cruel of all the crosses, poverty. Hundreds of millions of people living on this earth today find it necessary to struggle under the burden of this cross in order to enjoy the 3 bare necessities of life: a place to sleep, something to eat, and clothes to wear. Carrying the cross of poverty is no joke, but it seems significant that the greatest and most successful men and women who ever lived found it necessary to carry this cross before they arrived. Failure is generally accepted as a curse, but few people ever understand that failure is a curse only when it is accepted as such. But few ever learn this truth, that failure is seldom permanent. Go back over your own experiences for a few years, and you will see that the failures generally turned out to be blessings in disguise. Failure teaches men lessons which they would never learn without it. Moreover, it teaches in a language that is universal. Among the great lessons taught by failure is that of humility. No man may become great without feeling himself humble and insignificant when compared to the world about him, and the stars above him, and the harmony with which nature does her work. For each man, for every rich man's son who becomes a useful, constructive worker in behalf of humanity, there are 99 others rendering useful service who come up through poverty and misery. This seems more than a coincidence. Most people who believe themselves to be failures are not failures at all. Most conditions which people look upon as failure are nothing more than temporary defeat. If you pity yourself and feel that you are a failure, think how much worse off you would be if you had to change places with others who have real cause for complaint. In the city of Chicago lives a beautiful young woman. Her eyes are light blue. Her complexion is extremely fair. She has a sweet, charming voice. She is educated and cultured. 3 days after graduating in one of the colleges of the East, she discovered that she had Negro blood in her veins. The man to whom she was engaged refused to marry her. The Negroes do not want her, and the whites will not associate with her. During the remainder of her life, she must bear the brand of permanent failure. What? Says, remember, this is permanent failure. As this essay is being written, news comes of a beautiful girl baby who was born to an unwed girl and taken into an orphanage, there to be brought up mechanically without ever knowing the influence of a mother's love. All through life, this unfortunate child must bear the brunt of another's mistake which can never be corrected. How fortunate are you, no matter what may be your imaginary failures, that you are not this child. If you have a strong body and a sound mind, you have much for which you ought to be thankful. Millions of people all about you have no such blessing. Now, this was 100 years ago, so that's very racist and odd. That may be part of the reason this book may not have stood the test of time. I mean, it's not nearly as racist as I think some of the comments made by very public people of today, but nonetheless, it still showed that the world was pretty much the same. I mean, yes, black people have more rights, but if you look at um, this situation that we're in as a country, where I mean, that's kind of the branding that different races are getting. White males are getting a very bad branding right now. And transgender LGBTQ, that's getting a different type of branding. Where 100 years ago, it's really wild to think about. And I think that this is a perfect lesson to get your own thoughts just going. I'm not trying to sway you with any particular thoughts. I'm just trying to get you thinking about accurate thought, that people are individuals, and someone, regardless of their race or background or any of that. I mean, background, certain backgrounds, if someone's been a drug addict and is still a drug addict, well, they might not be able to influence you too much. Uh, but with accurate thought, you may be able to influence them and help them by understanding that they are not a permanent failure. Like this, it says, remember, this is permanent failure. I think this is very odd because it's not permanent failure, because in time, now there are all sorts of interracial marriages. It may have been a permanent failure with that particular male, but it was a temporary failure in the sense that maybe she found someone better. I don't know. She might have died alone, given that this was 100 years ago. It's very interesting. And I think we all need to just understand that whatever our adversity and defeat is, someone else has already been through much worse. If you have a strong body and a strong mind, you have much for which you ought to be thankful. Millions of people all about you have no such blessings. Careful analysis of 100 men and women whom the world has accepted as being great show that they were compelled to undergo hardship and temporary defeat and failure, such as you probably have never known and never will know. Woodrow Wilson went to his grave altogether too soon, the victim of a cruel slander and disappointment, believing no doubt that he was a failure. Time, the great miracle worker that rights all wrongs and turns failures into success, will place the name of Woodrow Wilson at the top of the page of the really great. Few now living have the vision to see that out of Wilson's failure will come eventually such a powerful demand for universal peace that war will be an impossibility. Lincoln died without knowing that his failure gave sound foundation to the greatest nation on the earth. Columbus died a prisoner in chains without ever knowing that his failure meant the discovery of the great nation which Lincoln and Wilson helped to preserve with their failures. Do not use the word failure carelessly. Remember, carrying a burdensome cross temporarily is not failure. If you have the real seed of success within you, a little adversity and temporary defeat will only serve to nurture that seed and cause it to burst forth into maturity. When divine intelligence wants a great man or woman to render some needed service in the world, the fortunate one is tested out through some form of failure. If you are undergoing what you believe to be failure, have patience. You may be passing through your testing time. No capable executive would select as his lieutenants those whom he had not tested for reliability, loyalty, perseverance, and other essential qualities. Responsibility and all that goes with it always gravitates to the person who will not accept temporary defeat as permanent failure. The test of a man is the fight he makes, the grit that he daily shows, the way he stands on his feet and takes fate's numerous bumps and blows. A coward can smile when there's naught to fear, when nothing his progress bars. But it takes a man to stand up and cheer while some other fellow stars. It isn't the victory, after all, but the fight that a brother makes. The man who, driven against the wall, still stands up erect and takes the blows of fate with his head held high. Bleeding and bruised and pale is the man who will win in the by and by, for he isn't afraid to fail. It's the bumps you get and the jolts you get, and the shocks that your courage stands, the hours of sorrow and vain regret, the prize that escapes your hands, the test that tests your mettle and prove your worth. It isn't the blows you deal, but the blows you take on the good old earth that show if your stuff is real. Failure often places one in a position where unusual effort must be forthcoming. Many a man has wrung victory from defeat, fighting with his back to the wall, where he could not retreat. Caesar had long wished to conquer the British. He quietly sailed his soldier-laden ships to the British island, unloaded his troops and supplies, then gave the order to burn all the ships. Calling his soldiers about him, he said, "Now it is win or perish. We have no choice." They won. Men usually win when they make up their minds to do so. Burn the bridges behind you and observe how well you work when you know that you have no retreat. A streetcar conductor got a leave of absence while he tried out a position in a great mercantile business. "If I do not succeed in holding my new position," he remarked to a friend, "I can always come back to the old job." At the end of the month, he was back, completely cured of all his ambition to do anything except work on a streetcar. Had he resigned instead of asking for a leave of absence, he might have made good in his new job. The 13 Club movement, which is now spreading over the entire country, was born as the result of a shocking disappointment experienced by its founder. That shock was sufficient to open the mind to a broader and more comprehensive view of the needs of the age, and this discovery led to the creation of one of the most outstanding influences of this generation. The 15 laws of success upon which this course is based grew out of 20 years of hardship and poverty and failure, such as rarely come to one person in an entire lifetime. Surely those of you who have followed this series of lessons from the beginning must have read between the lines and back of them a story of struggle which has meant self-discipline and self-discovery, such as never would have been known without this hardship. Study the roadway of life in the picture at the beginning of this essay, and observe that everyone who travels that road carries a cross. Remember, as you take inventory of your own burdens, that nature's richest gifts go to those who meet failure without flinching or whining. Nature's ways are not easily understood. If they were, no one could be tested for great responsibility with failure. When nature wants to make a man, and shake a man, and wake a man, when nature wants to make a man to do the future's will, when she tries with all her skill, and she yearns with all her soul to create him large and whole, with what cunning she prepares him, how she goads and never spares him, how she wets him and she frets him, and in poverty begets him, how she often disappoints, how she often anoints, with that wisdom she will hide him, never minding that what betide him, though his genius sob with slighting, and his pride may not forget, bids him struggle harder yet, makes him lonely, so that only God's high messages shall reach him, so that she may surely teach him that the hierarchy planned, through though he may not understand, gives him passions to command, how remorselessly she spurs him, with terrific ardor stirs him, when she poignantly prefers him. Lo the crisis, lo the shout, that must call the leader out. When the people need salvation, doth he come to lead the nation. The doth nature show her plan, when the world has found a man. There is no failure. That which looks to be failure is usually nothing but temporary defeat. Make sure that you do not accept it as permanent. There is a sure way to avoid criticism. Be nothing and do nothing. Get a job as a street sweeper and kill off ambition. The remedy never fails. Okay, now the brain. Find the page. Okay, Think and Grow Rich, the brain. Anybody can wish for riches, and most people do, but only a few know that a definite plan plus a burning desire for wealth are the only dependable means of accumulating wealth. Chapter 13 of Think and Grow Rich, the brain, a broadcasting and receiving station for thought, the 12th step toward riches. More than 40 years ago, the author, working in conjunction with the late Dr. Alexander Graham Bell and Dr. Elmer R. Gates, observed that every human brain is both a broadcasting and receiving station for the vibration of thought. In a fashion similar to that employed by the radio broadcasting principle, every human brain is capable of picking up vibrations of thought which are being released by other brains. In connection with the statement in the preceding paragraph, compare and consider the description of the creative imagination, as outlined in the chapter on imagination. The creative imagination is the receiving set of the brain, which receives thoughts released by the brains of others. It is the agency of communication between one's conscious or reasoning mind and the four sources from which one may receive thought stimuli. When stimulated or stepping up to a high rate of vibration, the mind becomes more receptive to thought, which reaches it through outside sources. This stepping up process takes place through the positive emotions or the negative emotions. Through the emotions, the vibrations of thoughts may be increased. The emotion of sex stands as the head of the list of human emotions as far as intensity and driving force are concerned. The brain, which has been stimulated by this emotion, functions at a much more rapid rate than it does when that emotion is absent. The result of sex transmutation is the increase of thoughts to such a pitch that the creative imagination becomes highly receptive to ideas. On the other hand, when the brain is functioning at a rapid rate, it not only attracts thoughts and ideas released by other brains, but it gives to one's own thoughts and that feeling which is essential before those thoughts will be picked up and acted upon by one's subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is the sending station of the brain, through which vibrations of thought are broadcast. The creative imagination is the receiving set, through which the energies of thought are picked up. Along with the important factors of the subconscious mind and the faculty of the creative imagination, which constitute the sending and receiving sets of your mental broadcasting machinery. Consider now the principle of autosuggestion, which is the medium by which you may put into operation your broadcasting station. Through the instructions described in the chapter on autosuggestion, you were definitely informed of the method by which desire may be transmuted into its monetary equivalent. Operation of your mental broadcasting station is a comparatively simple procedure. You have but three principles to bear in mind and to apply when you wish to use your broadcasting station: the subconscious mind, creative imagination, and autosuggestion. The stimuli through which you put these three principles into action has been described, and the procedure begins with desire. The greatest forces are intangible. Through the ages which have passed, man has depended too much upon his physical senses and has limited his knowledge to physical things, which he could see, touch, weigh, and measure. We are now entering the most marvelous of all ages, and an age which will teach us something of the intangible forces of the world about us. Perhaps we shall learn as we pass through this age that the other self is more powerful than the physical self we see when we look into a mirror. Sometimes men speak lightly of the intangibles, the things which the things which they cannot perceive through any of their five senses. And when we hear them, it should remind us that all of us are controlled by forces which are unseen and intangible. The whole of mankind has not the power to cope with nor to control the intangible force wrapped up in the rolling waves of the oceans. Man has not the capacity to understand the intangible force of gravity, which keeps this little earth suspended in space and keeps man from falling from it, much less the power to control that force. Man is entirely subservient to the intangible forces which comes with a thunderstorm, and he is just as helpless in the presence of the intangible force of electricity. Nor is this by any means the end of man's ignorance in connection with things unseen and intangible. He does not understand the intangible forces and intelligence wrapped up in the soil of the earth, the force which provides him with every morsel of food he eats, every article of clothing he wears, every dollar he carries in his pockets. The dramatic story of the brain. Last but not least, man, with all of his boasted culture and education, understands little or nothing of the intangible force, the greatest of all the intangibles of thought. He knows but little concerning the physical brain and its vast network of intricate machinery through which the power of thought is translated into its material equivalent. But he is now entering an age which shall yield enlightenment on the subject. Men of science have begun to turn their attention to the study of this stupendous thing called a brain. And while they are still in the kindergarten stage of their studies, they have uncovered enough knowledge to know that the central switchboard of the human brain, the number of lines which connect the brain cells one with another, equal the figure 1 followed by 15 million ciphers. The figure is stupendous, said Dr. C. Judson Herrick of the University of Chicago. That astronomical figures dealing with hundreds of millions of light years become insignificant by comparison. It has been determined that there are from 10 billion to 14 billion nerve cells in the human cerebral cortex, and we know that these are arranged in definite patterns. These arrangements are not haphazard, they are orderly. Recently developed methods of electrophysiology draw off action currents from very precisely located cells or fibers with microelectrodes, amplify them with radio tubes, and record potential differences to a millionth of a volt. It is inconceivable that such a network of intricate machinery should be in existence for the sole purpose of carrying on the physical functions incidental to growth and maintenance of the physical body. Is it not likely that the same system which gives billions of brain cells the media for communication one with another provides also the means of communications with other intangible forces? The New York Times published an editorial showing that at least one great university and one intelligent investigator in the field of mental phenomena are carrying on an organized research through which conclusions have been reached that parallel many of those described in this and the following chapter. The editorial briefly analyzed the work carried on by Dr. Rhine and his associates at Duke University. What is telepathy? A month ago, we cited on this page some of the remarkable results achieved by Professor Rhine and his associates in Duke University from more than 100,000 tests to determine the existence of telepathy and clairvoyance. These results were summarized in the first two articles in Harper's Magazine. In the second, has now appeared, the author E. H. Wright attempts to summarize what has been learned or what it seems reasonable to infer regarding the exact nature of these extrasensory modes of perception. The actual existence of telepathy and clairvoyance now seems to some scientists enormously probable as the result of Rhine's experiment. Various recipients were asked to name as many cards in the special pack as they could without looking at them or without other sensory access to them. About a score of men and women were discovered who could regularly name so many of the cards correctly that there was not one chance in many a million of their having done their feats by luck or accident. But how did they do them? These powers, assuming that they exist, do not seem to be sensory. There is no known organ for them. The experiments worked just as well at distances of several hundred miles as they did in the same room. These facts also dispose, in Mr. Wright's opinion, of the attempt to explain telepathy or clairvoyance through any physical theory of radiation. All known forms of radiant energy decline inversely as the square of the distance traversed. Telepathy and clairvoyance do not, but they do vary through physical cause as our other mental powers do. Contrary to widespread opinion, they do not improve when the percipient is asleep or half asleep, but on the contrary, when he is most wide awake and alert. Rhine discovered that a narcotic will invariably lower a percipient's score, while a stimulant will always send it higher. The most reliable performer apparently cannot make a good score unless he tries to do his best. One conclusion that Wright draws with some confidence is that telepathy and clairvoyance are really one and the same gift. That is, the faculty that sees a card face down on a table seems to be exactly the same one that reads a thought residing only in another's mind. There are several grounds for believing this. So far, for example, the two gifts that have been found in every person who enjoys either of them. In every one so far, the two have been of equal vigor, almost exactly. Screens, walls, distances have no effect at all on either. Wright advances from his conclusion to express that he puts forth as no more than the mere hunch that other extrasensory experiences, prophetic dreams, premonitions of disaster, and the like may also prove to be part of the same faculty. The reader is not asked to accept any of these conclusions unless he finds it necessary, but the evidence that Rhine has piled up must remain impressive. How to join minds in teamwork. In view of Dr. Rhine's announcement in connection with the conditions under which the mind responds to what he terms extrasensory modes of perception, I now feel privileged to add to his testimony by stating that my associates and I have discovered what we believe to be the ideal conditions under which the mind can stimulate so that the sixth sense described in the next chapter can be made to function in a practical way. The conditions to which I refer consist of a close working alliance between myself and two members of my staff. Through experimentation and practice, we have discovered how to stimulate our minds by applying the principle used in connection with the invisible counselors described in the next chapter, so that we can, by a process of blending our three minds into one, find the solution to a great variety of personal problems which are submitted by my clients. This procedure is very simple. We sit down at a conference table, clearly state the nature of the problem we have under consideration, Then begin discussing it. Each contributes whatever thoughts may occur. The strange thing about this method of mind stimulation is that it places each participant in communication with unknown sources of knowledge, definitely outside his own experience. If you understand the principle described in the chapter on the master mind, you of course recognize the roundtable procedure here described as being a practical application of the mastermind. This method of mind stimulation through harmonious discussion of definite subjects between three people illustrates the simplest and most practical use of the mastermind. By adapting and following a similar plan, any student of this philosophy may come into possession of the famous Carnegie formula, briefly described in the introduction. If it means nothing to you at this time, mark this page and read it again after you have finished the last chapter. All right, that was another chapter finished. So we were talking about accurate thought, and then we kind of finished with the brain. And the point is, with finishing with that chapter, is to remind us that we all need to be constantly aware of our accurate thinking. And we need to create auto-suggestion to understand that even though things may not be accurate now, if we auto-suggest, we can create a future for ourselves. And through negative thoughts, we can create a negative future. Through positive thoughts, we can create a positive future. So thank you for another episode. Check out the lawofsuccessmastermind.com and inspirelansing.com. Have a good night.